Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jessica Burr. I'm with the APS Technical Assistance Resource Center, also known as APS TARC, and I would like to welcome you to our webinar today on scams and frauds, reporting and recovering funds. And I will introduce our speakers here in a bit. Next slide, please. Just a quick disclaimer, the Adult Protective Services Technical Assistance Resource Center is a project of the U.S. Administration for Community Living, Administration on Aging, Department of Health and Human Services, and is administered by the WRMA Incorporated. Contractors or speakers' findings, conclusions, and points of view do not necessarily represent the U.S. Administration for Community Living, Administration on Aging, or the Department of Health and Human Services official policy. Next slide, please. This webinar is being brought to you by a collaboration amongst the ACL, Office of Elder Justice and Adult Protective Service Resource Centers. You see them listed here on this slide, and we invite you to visit their websites to see what they can do. Next slide, please. Now on to a little bit of housekeeping. Handout slides are available for download in the handout section of your webinar control panel. You may download them at any time, and they will also be posted on our website along with this recording. Please use your computer speakers to access audio for this webinar. Please ensure that the speaker volume is adjusted to your desired volumes. If you experience audio problems due to internet connection speeds or hardware issues, we recommend exiting the webinar and re-entering. Next slide, please. We anticipate having questions at the end of our webinar today, but you're more than welcome to ask questions of our presenter at any time by typing them into the questions box. We will relay as many as we can to the speakers when we pause for questions. This webinar is being recorded, and all registrants will receive an email when the recording is made available on the APS TARC website. All attendees will also receive an automatically generated email approximately 24 hours after the webinar ends with a link to a certificate of attendance. And there will be a brief webinar survey that will be sent to you. Please, please, please complete that because we truly appreciate the feedback. Next slide, please. So before we get started, we're just going to take a quick attendee poll, single choice answer. You'll see that here in a minute on your screen. Go ahead and click on which of the following professions that you identify the most with. So we have social service professional, legal assistant professional, medical professional, justice professional, or other. So we'll give you a few seconds for that. And again, you can just go ahead and click on your screen. We'll give it another second or two. All right, let's go ahead and share those results. All right, so almost 3/4 social service professionals. Well, welcome. Legal assistants, we have 8%. Doesn't look like we have anybody from medical on today. We have 8% for justice and 13% other. Excellent. Next slide, please. All right, so we have a panel of speakers for you today. For opening remarks, we have Erin Key, Aging Program Specialist, Office of Elder Justice and Adult Protective Services, Administration on Aging, Administration for Community Living, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. For opening remarks, we also have Jacqueline Blase-Freed, Assistant Director, Consumer Protection Branch, United States Department of Justice. Our first speaker today will be Kate Kramer, Older Americans Policy Analyst, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, Office for Older Americans. Then we'll have Danny Kaiserman, Elder Justice Staff Attorney at Bet-Sedek Legal Services. And then finally, Rachel Yurkovich from the Management and Program Analyst, Federal Bureau of Investigations, Internet Crime Complaint Center. Next slide, please. All right, Erin, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you all for joining the 2023 Administration for Community Living and Department of Justice's Fraud and Scams webinar series. Today is the second webinar in this year's series. In this 4-part webinar series, we are taking a comprehensive look at the lifespan of scams and frauds with the framework that the best response is a holistic, person-centered practice from all professionals and advocates involved in addressing these types of situations. The first webinar in this series was in April, and it was titled The Fraud Pitch. In it, we discussed how mental frameworks impact an individual's susceptibility to fraud, as well as recent research on fraud pitches and insight into why they succeed. We know that response to elder maltreatment is strengthened through partnerships, where enforcement, direct response, human services, and legal services agencies work in unison with one another. That webinar shared an example of a successful fraud prevention program in Marin County, California, that included partnerships across multiple agencies. If you're interested in viewing the first webinar in this series, you can find out more on the APS TARC website, and you can also view a recording. Today's webinar is about how to report scams and frauds and recover funds. Our speakers will discuss why reporting is critical to combating scams and frauds and how you can provide support for someone who is making a report or attempting to recover funds. Our goal with this webinar series is to provide actionable learnings that empower all of us to collaborate and partner so that we can better fight these frauds and scams. Last week, we celebrated World Elder Abuse Awareness Day, which is a call to action for individuals, organizations, and communities to educate each other on how to identify, address, and prevent abuse. It reminded us that elder abuse impacts us all, and so it is important to find the right solutions to address it. We hope the lessons in today's webinar will help you learn some steps that you can take to empower older adults to resist, to mitigate, and recover from exposures to scams and frauds. Later this year, during the third webinar of this series, we will discuss the emotional toll taken by fraud and steps that can be taken to improve the mental well-being of individuals who have experienced these situations. The final session will talk about how we can prevent fraudsters from succeeding in their attempts to steal money and information. And that webinar will provide attendees with a toolbox of awareness ideas and resources, as well as methodologies and approaches that build trust with older adults at risk for exploitation. We hope you'll be able to join us for these future webinars. It is now my pleasure to turn the mic over to Jackie Blasey-Fried, who is my partner in developing this webinar series and is the Assistant Director of the Consumer Protection Branch of the Department of Justice. Jackie.
Thanks so much, Erin, and thanks to everyone who was able to join us today. I hope, as Erin said, that if you didn't get a chance to join us for the first session, you go back and take a look at that. It was really a phenomenal discussion about why some of these scams work and the psychology that fraudsters use in order to get us all on the emotional hook and try to get our money. I'm very excited about today's conversation. Being in law enforcement, we spend a lot of time encouraging victims as well as family members to report fraud. We spend a lot of time talking about trying to get people to do it and telling them where to do it and how to do it, but I think we spend less time talking about how those reports actually factor into our cases, our intelligence gathering, and our prosecution. We spend less time than we should talking about what makes those reports really valuable, and we spend less time than we should talking about what some of the obstacles are and why victims are sometimes hesitant to come forward and talk to law enforcement. So today's hour-long conversation is really to get to the crux of all of that. Why reporting is hard, why it matters, and how to do it to make it the best possible scenario so we can use it to help get the fraudsters, to get the facilitators, and ultimately to build better educational tools for everyone to try to figure out why fraud works and to try to keep fraudsters at bay. So with that, I will turn it back over to today's organizers. Thank you all so very much for joining us today, and I hope that you're able to join us for the next 2 sessions of this series as well.
Thank you so much, Erin and Jacqueline. I appreciate you laying the foundation for what's to come. All right, so it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker today, Kate Kramer from the Older Americans Policy Analyst, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, Office for Older Americans. Kate, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, and hi everyone. Thanks again for joining us today. I work on projects related to age-friendly banking, elder financial exploitation, and financial technology, so all of these topics are near and dear to my heart, and I'm very happy to be here today with you. So today I'm going to talk about the factors that influence whether people report elder financial exploitation in various situations, and the factors that influence whether people actually recover any of the money that they lose to financial exploitation. And then my co-presenters will delve deeper into reporting and the later steps of investigation and prosecution a little later in today's session. Next slide, please. It won't surprise you to see I have a disclaimer as well. This presentation is being made by a CFPB representative on behalf of the Bureau. It doesn't constitute legal interpretation, guidance, or advice of CFPB. Any opinions or views stated by me are my own and may not represent the Bureau's views. Next slide, please. Now that we've got that out of the way, let me share a little bit about CFPB for those who might not be as familiar with us. So the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or CFPB, is a federal agency, and our mission is to help consumer finance markets work. We do that by making rules more effective, by consistently and fairly enforcing those rules, and by empowering consumers to take more control over their financial lives. And addressing fraud, scams, and elder financial exploitation is one of our goals at CFPB. And our Office for Older Americans is dedicated to working on behalf of adults aged 62 and older, as well as financial caregivers and professionals who might interact with older adults. So our work really focuses on developing and promoting policies that empower older consumers to make sound financial decisions as they age. We work to identify emerging consumer protection risks, and we coordinate our efforts with other federal agencies and state regulators, as well as all kinds of different stakeholders. Next slide, please. In the fall, our Office for Older Americans released a report that focuses on the return of money that's lost to elder financial exploitation. So we did this study from August 2020 to December 2021. It involved a literature review and qualitative research with 43 participants who included older adults, caregivers, and professionals. And the report looks at the factors that influence when and whether people recover money after elder financial exploitation. And as this slide shows, elder financial exploitation has a huge cost to older adults. And the estimated financial losses range from $1.7 billion to $36.5 billion a year, depending on the study that you look at. And despite the variation there, you can tell that losses are high, and the average or mean individual losses in the tens of thousands as well. The literature on financial recovery, however, meaning the money that's stolen through elder financial exploitation that gets returned to people, is very limited. It's the sad reality that older adults who experience elder financial exploitation very rarely recover any of the money that they've lost. So I'm going to talk about some of the barriers that prevent people from recovering their stolen money. Next slide, please. In the report, we found that there were 4 stages to the recovery process, and each of these have factors that can affect whether someone recovers their money. The first is identifying that the crime happened. What factors affect whether people recognize that something has occurred? The second is reporting. So what factors affect whether people report or not? The third is investigation. What affects whether the case gets investigated? And the fourth stage is return of funds. So what factors affect whether people actually get their money back? I'm going to focus on reporting and recovery stages numbers 2 and 4 for today, but you can take a look at our report to learn more about the others. Next slide, please. So the second stage after exploitation is initially identified is reporting to the appropriate authorities. So some of the main players when it comes to reporting include adult protective services, financial institutions, law enforcement, and helplines. And I think you'll hear some more about this from the next presenter. But again, our study looked at factors that affect whether someone reports. So here are some of those. One are the financial factors, like the method and the amount of the transaction. So if the loss occurred on a credit card, people are more likely to report. And the older adult's personal financial situation comes into play as well. For example, someone who lives on a very limited income and is counting every dollar and really needs that money, they might be more likely to report than someone who has a large financial cushion. Maybe they don't pay as close attention to their finances, or perhaps they just don't feel that it's worthwhile to report that. Another big factor is whether the older adult knows the perpetrator. If they do know the perpetrator, they may be less likely to report because often they may not want that person to face jail time or be negatively affected if it's a close family member or friend. or they may feel sympathy for them or have rescued them multiple times in the past, particularly if the perpetrator may have some challenges with money or addiction. And we also found, much like the recent report from AARP and FINRA on victim blaming, that some older adults feel ashamed or embarrassed, or they blame themselves for what happened, so they don't report. And we know these are crimes perpetrated often by massive rings of criminals, and it certainly is no one's fault for experiencing fraud or financial exploitation, but we do see that experience of shame among people who experience this. And someone might not want to discuss what's going on. Maybe they are worried about retaliation from the perpetrator, or they have sympathy for that person, or for other reasons. But often with support from a trusted person, like a social service provider or another community member who may be here to support the person who has experienced this may at first refuse to talk about it, but may be open to talking about it later if they have someone encouraging them to report. Another factor we identified is if someone is in poorer health, they may not have the time or desire to deal with this financial issue. And faith in authorities plays a big role. So particularly for LGBTQ folks, people of color who face systemic discrimination or who may have personally had prior negative experiences, people may just not want to get the authorities involved. So you can see that there are a lot of barriers to reporting. So if the crime isn't reported, the person really typically cannot recover their funds. So this is a critical step. And I do want to emphasize again, interactions with service providers play a big role. So for example, if a bank teller warns the person that this is a scam and advises them about where to report it. So I encourage you in your work, if you're able to encourage others to report these crimes, they might be more likely to do so and more likely to get help. Next slide, please. All right, so with return of funds, there are some different ways that people might get their money back if they experience financial exploitation, if they get to that fourth step. A credit card company might reverse the charge once they identify fraud. The perpetrator might sometimes directly repay the older adult. If there's a civil case brought, the older adult might get their money back through civil collection methods. If there's a criminal case brought, they might get money back through restitution. And finally, there are sometimes payouts from class action lawsuits or federal enforcement cases, like the Western Union case. Next slide, please. So these are some of the factors that affect the return of funds to older adults. And several of these are cross-cutting factors that we also found in other stages. Again, the method of transaction is a really big factor. If someone pays by credit card, they're more likely to recover their funds than using other payment methods. And they're much less likely to recover their money if they use methods like wire transfers, gift cards, or person-to-person or P2P payment apps. Another barrier in terms of return to funds is the perpetrator's ability to repay, because often by the time they're caught, the money is gone. They might not have anything else to repay that older person with. I also want to note that it's important to understand your state's civil laws, because some do have laws to help survivors of financial abuse and their attorneys to bring cases in civil court and recover assets. They might have processes to freeze remaining assets or to stop property transfers. And in some states, banks and credit unions can delay a disbursement of funds or place a hold on a transaction when they suspect elder financial abuse, and that can provide more time to investigate and to stop the fraud. I want to share this with you so you can share it with the folks you help. If the financial abuse involved a financial account, the person can contact their bank or credit union or credit card company or whatever financial services provider is involved, and they should do that as soon as possible, because depending on the situation, the financial institution might be able to get some or all of the money back. And it's also a good idea to check if the older adult has any insurance that might cover the loss. Next slide, please. So to wrap up, I just want to remind everyone, CFPB helps consumers connect with financial companies to fix errors, understand issues, and get direct responses about problems. So if you're working with someone who has a problem with a financial product or service, like a credit card or checking account, they can submit a complaint to CFPB and tell us about their issue, and we'll forward it to the company and work to get them a response. And typically that happens within about 15 days. You can see on this slide all the different products and services that people can submit a complaint about. And we do track trends in the complaints we receive. We also use that data to prioritize where to focus our policy work, our supervision, and our enforcement work. And we may also use specific complaints in specific actions. Next slide, please. On our website, you can find a ton of free resources that you can use to support consumers and educate your community members about these topics. We have a Money Smart for Older Adults curriculum, which is a scam prevention program. We have Managing Someone Else's Money Guides for Financial Caregivers, and we have a ton more. So please take a look. You can also join our mailing list, and we'll send you updates about new resources from our team. And I'll now turn it over to the next presenter. I believe that's Danny.
All right, thank you so much. I really appreciated the financial recovery framework and those resources. That's always so helpful, so thank you. All right, our next speaker, we're going to hand it over to Danny Kaiserman. She's Elder Justice Staff Attorney with Betzetic Legal Services. Danny, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me. And I also really wanted to thank all of you for attending, especially I know we have a lot of social service providers listening in, and you all play such a critical role in helping older and dependent adults. So we really appreciate you joining and wanting to learn more. So today I'm going to talk about tips for reporting scams, because the reporting process, as many of you know, can be difficult to navigate at times. And before I jump into kind of the basics of where to report and special tips for reporting, I did want to mention my role as a legal services attorney. So a lot of you may be wondering, you know, is there anything legal services agencies can do to help scam victims? And I'm here to say yes, and also as an attorney, it depends. So I am only representing one legal service agency, and every agency is different. I know this is a national webinar, so I hope that all of you are familiar with your local legal services groups and, you know, have connections with them and can ask, you know, what sort of services they may provide to scam victims. But I'll name just a few things that might come up where legal services can assist. The first thing is legal services can provide advice on reporting. They can help scam victims navigate complaints with their banks, you know, how to get that process started and what happens if they get denial letters from banks. They also may be able to help with related issues stemming from financial loss, specifically losses related to scams. Victims may then need to seek other sorts of legal assistance like debtor or creditor issues, or they may have related tax issues that legal services could potentially help with. Also, legal services can advise on things like how to do credit checks and how to do credit freezes when appropriate. And then the last thing I'll mention is legal service agencies can help connect victims to other local services and provide referrals. So I know, for example, at my legal service agency, I'm part of a task force with other community service agencies that help scam victims. So I know, you know, the local support groups and local law enforcement who works on these issues. So I try to send people who contact us to those other services as well. So now I will jump into the where of reporting. Next slide, please. So this is number one, and I'm going to list a few different places to report and the order of priority that I recommend, because I do know that sometimes there's fatigue in reporting and victims aren't always able to report to every place that we tell them to. So that's why I think it's important to prioritize certain federal agencies, and the number one being IC3. I'm not going to go into the details because our next presenter will be talking about why it is so crucial to report to IC3. I did just want to mention that you can report on behalf of a victim. It doesn't have to be, the report doesn't have to be made by the victim themselves. And then a quick tip is at the end, once you fill out all of the information for the report, you're going to get a message on the screen saying, "Thank you for submitting your complaint to the IC3. Please save or print a copy for your records." This is the only time you will have to make a copy of your complaint. So a lot of folks just close out that screen and forget about it, but we really recommend that victims or someone reporting on behalf of a victim take that opportunity to print it out, because you want to know what you submitted in case you need to add additional information later. Also, that information you might use then for other places that you report. So it's really critical to print a copy at the end, because otherwise you're not going to be able to access that report later. Next slide, please. So as our last presenter mentioned, the next place I recommend reporting is the financial institution involved in your case. So depending on the scam, this could be a bank, it could be a wiring company, it could be a credit card company, gift card company, crypto. There's really too many options for me to name because it's going to be so case specific. One tip that I will mention when reporting to the financial institutions is to always make sure and look up where you want to report and not just click recommended sites or suggested links. So sometimes when you enter something into Google, you'll get recommendations pop up, and you really want to make sure you're going straight to the source. So the main bank website, their phone number, whatever it is, you want to triple check that you're the one reaching out to them and that you're not just clicking some link suggested to you. I always mention this. I had one scam victim involved in a case with Venmo, and then when he went to report to Venmo, he was scammed even further because he called a number that he thought was Venmo, and it turned out it wasn't them. And that was because a false phone number came up. As we all know, the scammers are really good at what they do. So just always make sure you're clicking the right link, calling the right phone number. The next place I recommend reporting is the FTC. And I wanted to note that sometimes the FTC sends folks to the CFPB, where our last speaker was from, depending on the issue. So these federal government agencies are important to report to for all the reasons that Kate previously mentioned. You know, they collect a lot of important statistics, and that influences how they delegate resources. So reporting to these federal agencies are important. Next slide, please. Local law enforcement. This one is a little bit controversial because I've heard from a lot of victims it can be hard to get a copy of their police report. I do always suggest that victims try, or someone on behalf of the victim try. The reason is because a copy of a police report can be useful for some of those previous places I mentioned, specifically banks and other financial institutions. They often like to see a paper trail. So that's what a report can provide, and it could be relevant to other future legal action or tax issues as well. So try your best to advise victims to get a copy of the police report. And I know this webinar is brought to you by National Organization for APS. So hopefully you all know what APS is. It's a great social services program that investigates abuse for older and dependent adults. There's lots of different programs depending on state and county. I do think that reporting to APS can be really useful for victims, even though it's not going to help them recover money, but it will, APS can point them to different resources, specifically emergency shelter, counseling referrals, food security, Meals on Wheels, other things of that nature. Next slide, please. Now, here are some other places that you can report depending on the type of scam. So we have, for example, if it's related to mail, then you can report to the U.S. Postal Inspector's Service. For identity theft, there's additional places you can refer to. I did want to plug another nonprofit called the ID Theft Resource Center. They provide direct assistance and can help scam victims with reporting by going to that website or phone number. So they're a great resource for identity theft, which happens with a lot of scam victims. Next slide, please. I also wanted to plug the National Elder Fraud Hotline. They will actually help victims with reporting. We all know that reporting can be very burdensome and time consuming, and this is a free service that will help victims. So maybe there's some folks from the National Elder Fraud Hotline on the call today. I hope so, but thank you for the service you provide. It is really crucial. Again, I do have to just add as a quick tip, make sure that you're reaching out to them, because unfortunately they have been the victim of some scams as well, where people are calling saying that they're from the National Elder Fraud Hotline and pretending to help people with scam recovery reports, but really they're scammers themselves. So this number that I put here is legitimate. This is the number you should be giving out, and make sure victims contact them directly. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to go through all these, but what to include in your report, the victim's information, basically all the details that you have. And sometimes this can be a lot. I know scam victims who create a whole scam binder to collect this information and keep it safe. But as much detail as possible, account information, copies of checks, emails, everything like that is really crucial. Next slide, please. And then these are all things that you may not be able to include in your initial report to IC3, although you can include some things like copies of emails. But it is important to hold on to these things. So those scam victims, they might want to move on and delete everything. We really recommend that they keep their text messages, their emails saved, so that if there needs to be follow-up from a federal agency, for example, the FBI, that they can then produce that information that can be so critical for an investigation. Next slide. And I think that's it for me. Thank you all.
All right, thank you so much for that great information. All right, our final speaker on this topic today is Rachel Yurkovich, Management and Program Analyst, Federal Bureau of Investigation's Internet Crime Complaint Center. Rachel, it's all yours.
Hi, everyone. As she said, I am Rachel Yurkovich. I have been with the FBI for 26 years and IC3 for 11. I specialize in all kinds of frauds and scams, but especially elder fraud and call center frauds, such as your tech support and your government impersonation. The example given earlier about the Venmo, things like that. That's my specialty. Next slide. The IC3 really has the main purpose is that it provides a portal for the public to report fraud and scams. We started back in the year 2000 with just a little email system, and it's grown over the years to the online portal, which is www.ic3.gov. And from that, we have all kinds of reports. So anything that happens on the internet, and some things that don't happen on the internet, they get reported to us too. But all kinds of frauds and scams, investment scams, romance scams, tech support scams. We also get reports of ransomware and intrusions and data breaches. So everything that happens on the internet gets reported to us. Like I said, we are the main website for filing these complaints. We are also a central location to alert the public with PSAs and alerts. We perform analytics and case support to the FBI field offices. We also have a remote access database for sworn law enforcement only. So any sworn law enforcement can request access to our database. They can search through complaints. They can download complaints for use in their case files. And then we also have partnerships with private sector and law enforcement across all levels, local, state, federals, and international also. Next slide. Like I said, the IC3 is the main reporting function for the FBI for fraud, scams, elder frauds, intrusions, ransomware. We also work closely with the DOJ Elder Fraud Hotline. When somebody calls the Elder Fraud Hotline and needs assistance filing something regarding an internet fraud or a scam, they will walk them through that, or they will help file the complaint on their behalf. On the right-hand side, you can see these are our stats from our 2022 annual report. You can see the number of complaints that we got in each of the age ranges that we collect data on. We don't require that somebody provides us an age range, but it is helpful just in helping us focus and know what's going on in the public. Next slide, please. Last year in 2022, we received over 800,000 complaints submitted directly through ic3.gov. We do receive some complaints from other sources. We get a few things from the FTC. We get some complaints from the National Center for Disaster Fraud. We also get some reporting from the National Threat Operations Center. But like I said, over 800,000 last year were reported directly to us. And that was over $10.2 billion in losses. And that was a 48% increase over losses from the previous year. Our average receipt from complaints just from ic3.gov and not from other sources are around 2,300 complaints per day. And that last year alone, we sent out over 5,000 referrals to law enforcement, and most referrals contain more than one complaint. Sometimes there's just a one complaint referral, but often we aggregate those together and we send them out as potential cases to the field. On the left-hand side, this is how our life cycle works a little bit with our complaints. A complaint is filed by a victim or on their behalf. And of course, as mentioned earlier, they get an opportunity to save it or to print it. It comes in the door at the IC3. We have algorithms that read through the complaint and look for specific keywords and items that maybe will flag it to some kind of importance. For example, our financial fraud kill chain, which I'll talk about here in just a few minutes, or if there's some sort of threat keyword like bomb, gun, shoot, kill, those are automatically routed to the Threat Operations Center because they are 24/7 and they are trained specifically to deal with threats. Other than that, we will look through these complaints and we review them and we decide what kind of fraud or scam is happening. We classify them, we look at the dollar losses to see what's going on, and we try to take those and we try to match them up with active cases that are already happening in the Bureau. We also work with the other agencies. There are multiple cases out there with DHS and Postal, Secret Service. They are also utilizing our complaints. We try to aggregate complaints that are not linked to an active case yet, and we try to aggregate those and send them out to the field for referral. If not, we keep them in our database and we use those for trending purposes or possible future referrals. We have over 7 million complaints in our database right now. Next slide, please. And a lot of people ask why they should report. Well, first, it was mentioned, we can't investigate or help what we don't know about. If nobody tells us, we don't know. It helps us allocate resources and determine where we should be focusing. We estimate that only about 10 to 15% of what is happening gets reported to the IC3, and many other agencies report similar percentages. Just like with elder fraud, last year alone, over 88,000 complaints were filed by elderly victims or on their behalf, and it was $3.3 billion in losses just to the elderly victims. In addition, reporting to law enforcement helps protect the victim and gives legal documentation that a crime has occurred. This may come in handy later when filing taxes or proving identity theft or any other paperwork that they might have to file. It gives legal documentation that they were scammed or defrauded. We have also, if it's happening in your area, it's happening everywhere. We aggregate victims reporting to IC3 and refer them to law enforcement. We have victims reporting from every state and from over 200 countries, and they are all reporting the same types of scams. Yes, there may be twists and differences based on language or customs, but many of the scams are the same and often have the same subjects. And local and state law enforcement are often limited, especially in their jurisdiction and their reach. They do an amazing job at keeping our community safe and doing what they can, but they are also strapped for resources and time to investigate crimes which will almost certainly have an international nexus, as most of these frauds and scams do. Federal agencies such as the FBI have international reach to investigate these types of frauds and scams. Next slide, please. Another reason to file with IC3 is our recovery asset team. Back in 2018, the IC3 started a recovery asset team in an attempt to work with the financial institutions to help victims freeze funds and give them time to file the necessary legal paperwork to potentially claw that money back. And they have done really well since that started last year. They attempted over 2,800 incidences to freeze funds that were sent domestically, and they had a 73% success rate. They froze over $433 million. And like I said, this is really just because you're filing with the FBI when you file through IC3. When the complaint comes in, that algorithm searches it. If it meets those protocol and those thresholds, the RAT team acts on it, and they work with the financial institutions to freeze those funds. That allows, the IC3 complaint is a legal document. It's getting the FBI involved, and it's giving that time for the victim to file the necessary paperwork, which could take several days to get the transactions returned. There is also an international kill chain, which is handled by our CyWatch as in the cyber division. If a victim would happen to send funds internationally, the algorithm reads through those complaints and, provided that they have the transaction information in there, CyWatch will attempt the international freezes also. Next slide, please. And here's how you can help. First, offer emotional support. Offer sympathy, not judgment. So many of these victims, they are ashamed and they are embarrassed, like they're the only ones who have fallen to this scam, and we know that they're not. A lot of the times, if they don't know what to do, they feel they're alone and they don't know who to trust. Offer that shoulder, just for them to talk to and to offer guidance. You can assist with reporting to law enforcement. The sooner the fraud is reported, the better, especially for things like freezing funds and getting those back. But it doesn't matter how long of time it was, it's always good to report it because there might be something that can be done. There's cases ongoing through the Bureau and all these other agencies, reporting it so we know that it's happened, that it's out there. We allow somebody to file on behalf of the victim, so we get complaints filed on the behalf of victims from lawyers, APS, law enforcement, banks. Quite often, like a local police department will take their report and then they will take that and copy and paste it into the IC3 complaint form because they know that getting that information in there might be helpful. But like I said, just filing that complaint, it doesn't matter how long ago it happened, but making us aware that it happened is important. You can also assist with compiling and preserving records for law enforcement. As Danny mentioned previously, all of those things that are out there, electronic records, physical records, it might be a little overwhelming for victims to think about getting all of that together, But all of that stuff that Danny mentioned is really crucial, especially if law enforcement is able to take up that case. They are going to need those paper trails or those electronic trails. I'm often asked about if somebody should have their, especially in the tech support scams and things like that, if somebody should have their computer cleaned or wiped. Evidence from a computer can be very valuable. If you can stop a victim from wiping their computer, it's helpful, but we do know that people use their computers and that's their lifeline sometimes. You might encourage them to have it professionally imaged onto a hard drive before they have it wiped, just because that information that is on their computer, those records, those files, that trail is very important. Next slide, please. A little bit to know, and I asked my case agents friends, what is the best thing to do about supporting a victim? And it's to understand the life cycle a little bit of what a case agent usually goes through with a victim. First, reporting is getting them to report. Most of the time is the first part of the battle. And then notification. Sometimes a victim is notified of a potential case. If the victim does not know that they are a victim, sometimes this can take a while for them to realize or come to terms with it. As a matter of fact, through an investigation, new victims are identified who maybe didn't file anywhere, and it's hard for law enforcement to sometimes convince them that they are a victim. Finally, we can get to cooperation. The victim is eager to help. They want to provide information, and they're willing to talk whenever necessary. This is when things are going really well. And then frustration sets in. Because, especially federal cases, they can take a long time. There's a lot of red tape. Things take a while. They get frustrated. They become frustrated that the case or the arrest or the prosecution isn't happening quickly enough. They begin to backtrack on assisting, and they begin to rethink things. You can be supporting and encouraging to stay with it, offering support services, anything that you could think of, just to encourage them to stay with it, because their statement and their participation is so crucial, especially when we get to the prosecution phase. Finally, preservation is convincing the victim, like I said, that the case agent and the victim, they are a team. They have to work together, and nothing happens quickly in these cases, especially when they're international. And while they might not get their money back, that is the goal, but we have to be realistic. And sometimes when we talk about this, the victim is helping to put people in jail and hopefully to put an end to the fraud so that no one else has to go through what they are going through. Sometimes restitution is possible in these international cases, but not always. But the federal, FBI, DHS, we're all doing our best to try to put an end to some of these. Next slide. This is some of the information that is out on our website, ic3.gov. We have annual reports. You can go and read about everything that's happening, what we've received last year. There's public service announcements. You can go read those and find out. We try to make PSAs about trends and new stuff that we're seeing, and twists and turns and scams. So there's always something being posted. Usually every couple of weeks, something will go up. There's industry alerts for businesses. And like I said, our elder fraud report is out there too. And I think that's it for me.
All right, thank you so much for that. All of this is just really, really great information, and I appreciate, the intention behind the steps on making sure we can do as much for our older adults to recover funds as possible. So we have a few minutes to open it up for questions. Go ahead and throw your question in the questions box if you have one. There is one in there already, team, asking for any advice for scams that go through foreign banks. Does anyone want to take that one on? So scams that go through foreign banks.
I can. This is Rachel.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so like I said, so many of these scams are going to go international because those are the subjects that are perpetrating the scams. Like I said, we do have the international kill chain. If the complaint is filed within enough time, the SciWatch will attempt to do a freeze for those. A lot of the legats are on board. They are helping. They are working with international law enforcement and with the financial institutions overseas, because they do realize how big of a problem this is. there's been a lot of success in identifying the rings that are perpetrating, organizing the money mules that are opening these accounts to receive funds. But like I said, just reporting it so that we know where we have to focus, because that's how we, a lot of IC3 information is how we decide where we're going to focus our attention next on, depending on where the money is going.
Great question and great answer. I actually had a case, Rachel, where it was somebody out of a different country that scammed the person for over 3 years, and they were only able to get the last part of that money. They weren't able to go back through all the years and get all that recovered for her. So, all right, we have another questions regarding scams with Bitcoins. What about that? Scams with Bitcoins.
Unless this is Rachel, unless somebody else wants to speak up. So that, yeah, it's huge. The problems with cryptocurrency are so big because it's not regulated and everybody sees all the money that can be made from it and nobody understands it. So the FBI has started a virtual assets unit they're specifically working on this, tracing, tracking. I know that there are other agencies working on this also, because we know they're using our complaint data to find wallets, to find accounts, to find places where they need to start tracking. But the one of the important things I want to point out is if somebody is putting money, especially into like a Bitcoin ATM, because we get that reported a lot. Keep those receipts. Keep all of the tracking that you can. If you find a victim that has put money into a Bitcoin ATM, keeping all of those receipts, all of that tracking is important because there is a wallet, there is an account attached to that at the end. And as a matter of fact, when I try to encourage people to tell us where the ATM is, because those can be opened up by anybody. You don't have to be regulated. You can just buy one and install it in your front yard if you wanted to. And so, like I said, I would just say, make sure you're keeping track of those things, and that reporting it is huge.
This is Kate from CFPB. I can also speak a little to that. One thing that we've seen and that has been evident in Federal Trade Commission or FTC data as well is that cryptocurrency has kind of become one of the chosen payment methods for a lot of sort of more traditional scams. So people will take a scam that they've been running for years and then put a new twist on it by asking for payment in cryptocurrency. So we see that in romance scams really frequently, where someone may contact you online and say, oh, great to meet you. And then after a little while, they may mention to you, wow, I've made all of this money by investing in cryptocurrency, and I can teach you how to do it too. And then that might be part of a romance scam or just an investment scam, but typically they're convincing people to, what they say is, invest money into cryptocurrency, and essentially they're stealing those funds from the person. There are a lot of crypto-related scams and investment scams that we're seeing, and we have seen a big rise in those recently. And some of the tips that we tend to tell people are, don't trust someone who says that you can make guaranteed money by investing in cryptocurrency, or you can make fast, easy money. That's a scam to guarantee profits or to guarantee a huge return on your investment. And also, typically, if someone's asking you to pay them in cryptocurrency, for example, if you're trying to purchase something online and someone's asking you to pay them in crypto, it's usually not legitimate. Most businesses aren't going to demand that you pay with that method. So that's typically a scam. So those are just a couple of tips, but we have seen a big growth in these. And I agree, people don't understand how it works. Often they're excited about it or want to try something new, and it can result in serious loss of funds.
All right, thank you for that. I have time for about another 1 or 2 more questions. There's one that I want to ask. I'm combining a couple of questions together. There's a question regarding money via gift cards, cash, and then perpetrators using temporary throwaway phones, making it very difficult to follow the money. So any tips regarding gift cards, cash, or in using the throwaway phones?
We have seen a huge increase of people mailing cash or shipping it overnight. And as a matter of fact, we have a PSA getting ready to go out about that. But generally, like Kate mentioned earlier, the government's not going to ask you for a big wad of cash, and they're not. But we just it's hard to and a lot of the financial institutions are key in this, because when somebody comes in and wants to take out a lot of cash, to training them and talking to them and getting them used to asking questions about where it's going. We encourage the financial institutions to train the people in their banks to ask the questions, but that's one of our key things, is that the government's not going to ask for a bunch of cash. And the throwaway phones, especially in some of the scams that I work, they rotate those numbers for a few months and then they get a new number. But those numbers are actually really crucial, because we can get a lot of information just by during the investigation part, that linked to those numbers. Like I said, they have to be registered somewhere, so we can usually get that information on the back end.
All right.
This is
And
Danny. I'll
Yep,
just
go ahead.
add in quickly in regards to gift cards. I mean, gift cards have been a huge issue for a long time, and I'm glad someone asked about them. Even though the money is going to be gone pretty much directly as soon as you hand over, the ID number on the back of the gift cards, it is really important if you can advise victims to keep track of those numbers on the gift cards and the amounts of the gift cards. Also keeping receipts for purchase of the gift cards. Same with ATM transaction receipts. Just as much as possible, hanging on to any sorts of receipts. As Rachel just mentioned, there is a big movement towards training, and not just bank staff, but also, people who work at Target and CVS, who are the ones that are, ringing up gift cards, sometimes large amounts or several gift cards at once, to ask those questions. And there really needs to be a lot more done on the training piece, but I appreciate you bringing up that issue, because it is an important one.
And hey, this is Jackie with the Department of Justice. I just want to throw in real quickly that while gift cards are a uniquely challenging payment mechanism, they are not an insurmountable payment mechanism. And federal law enforcement has done a number of cases in the last year against people who are basically laundering gift cards. And none of those cases could happen without, as Danny said, people keeping those gift card receipts, knowing where they bought the gift card, often reporting to the store where they bought the gift card, whether it's Target or Walmart or Best Buy, and collecting those complaints and reporting to law enforcement. So gift cards are a problematic payment. They can sometimes be difficult to trace. And as Danny said, the money can move quickly. But in some ways, that makes the reports even more important, because we have to know who's behind those gift cards, who actually purchased them and why, in order to do the federal prosecution. So really important to keep the receipts, keep the numbers, and of course, report to law enforcement.
All right, we have about 1 minute left. I actually wanted to get to this question, so just hang on just a little bit. Each of you can maybe take 10, 15 seconds. The question is, what do you do when you can't convince the victim they're a victim? That is a great question.
This is Danny. I'll start by seeing if they'll agree to go to a support group. AARP has a great support group, and I've heard stories of people who have gone, and it wasn't until they heard other victims speak about their experiences and share really similar, eerily similar stories, that they realized that they too were a victim.
All right, anybody else want to comment on that before we start wrapping up?
Yeah,
This is Kate.
okay.
Oh, I can just comment really quickly. That is extremely difficult, and I was in that situation myself in legal aid in a previous role. And I think sometimes the more times someone hears it from different sources, like if you can send them an article that talks about it and maybe talk to a close family member or a friend who can back you up and share the same information, get their bank to share the information with them if it's involving a financial institution. I think sometimes hearing it from a lot of sources, and even from a law enforcement person who might be responding, might be a trusted source, that can be helpful, but it is really hard.
All right, anybody else?
Yeah, this is Rachel. So quite often, like I said, you can file on behalf of somebody, they're a victim, this is happening. We've had family members file saying this is happening to my mother, my grandmother. Quite often what will happen is we can get those referred out. Case agents will go out and, taking other examples of complaints that we have, of filings that we have, to speak to the victims. It's quite often too, in some of these scams, they're unwitting money mules. They're receiving and sending funds on behalf of these scammers, like especially in romance scams or whatever, like something like that. Having somebody, the actual FBI agent, call them or show up at their door sometimes will help.
All right. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. Next slide, please. Thank you so much for everybody being here today. Thank you to our audience for investing in your professional development. This webinar will be available here in the next couple of weeks along with the PowerPoint slides. So you all enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you for all that you do for keeping our older adult and dependent adult population free from abuse, neglect, and exploitation. All right, take care. Bye-bye.